Welcome to the Niche Pursuits podcast. Today we're joined again by Michael Donovan. You might remember his interview 9 or 10 months ago where he came on and talked about how he started a website on the side about 2 years prior, and it had grown to making over $20,000 per month 2 years in on the project. Well, fast forward to today, Mike has sold this site, and he walks us through the process he went through to get that site sold. It wasn't quite as easy as you might imagine. The site continued to grow for many months after we last talked to him, but then he went through a couple of challenges. Number one, he had a deal fall through. Number two, he got a manual action from Google. Now, he did go on to sell the site. It was a very successful sale for him, but we get to hear the whole story, how he ended up navigating through all these situations along the way to sell his site. It's a great interview, and I hope you enjoy. Introducing nichesites.com. Are you looking to scale your niche site portfolio or build your first website? Look no further than nichesites.com. With a portfolio of successful websites and over 700 plus satisfied clients, the folks at nichesites.com have the skills and experience to help you succeed. From keyword research to link building, content writing to done-for-you websites, nichesites.com offers a full range of services to help your content site grow. As the saying goes, a trial is worth more than 1,000 words, and they're offering a special trial just for new customers. You get 5,000 words of content completely free with your order of 10,000 plus traffic backlinks. Don't miss this opportunity. Head on over to nichesites.com/trial and take advantage of this amazing trial offer. Again, it's niche sites, plural, nichesites.com/trial. Go claim your free content today. Before we jump into the podcast, I wanted to let you know that today's episode is sponsored by Search Intelligence. Here's a short clip of Ferry from Search Intelligence showing you how their agency built digital PR links to a client's website.
High-tier backlinks in publications such as Daily Post, MSN, Birmingham Mail, and many more. Let me show you how we've done it. The campaign was pretty simple. We looked at the number of Instagram followers for each contestant in the Dancing on Ice show that aired in January. We sorted the contestants by the most popular ones. Now we've had the most influential Dancing on Ice contestant. Then we've also used an Instagram earnings calculator to calculate how much every contestant could make from one post on Instagram based on the number of their followers and engagement rate. Then we put these findings in a nice press release and an email, and we found the relevant journalists with a tool called Roxhill, where we looked at journalists who covered the show in the past 30 days and sent the findings and the press release to these journalists. And then the links started landing like this and this and this and many more. I hope this inspires and shows you that you can build links with simple and basic campaigns.
If you want similar link building PR campaigns for your website, head to search-intelligence.co.uk and get in touch with them now. All right, welcome back to the Niche Pursuits podcast. My name is Jared Bauman, and today we have a returning guest, Michael Donovan. Mike, how you doing?
Hey, Jared. I'm doing great. Thanks.
Good to have you back. We had you on, we had to look it up before we got started about 9 months ago. So less than a year ago, you came on and the interview is a very popular one. It was about your growth of a website you had started about 2 years before that and was at the time of recording making about $20,000 a month. It was such a cool story. Obviously, we want people to go back and if they haven't heard that one, listen to it again. It was a popular one. But if you could, catch us up on who you are. For those who didn't hear the episode, and maybe let's just do like a couple minute flyby of the first 2 years of this website, because we're going to be talking about what's been going on with it over the last 9 months since that episode.
Yeah, sure. So I'll try to summarize that hour episode in just a couple minutes. But the story. So I'm Michael Donovan. The story was, is of this site that I just recently sold. It was the first site that I had started back in early 2020. I'd never learned much about SEO, didn't know a lot about content sites, but just started publishing slowly. First year, I think I published 45 posts total, and then slowly built into year two, more and more publishing on that site. But it was, a very slow burn. So it took about 6 months before I earned my first dollar with that site. And then flash forward to when you and I had that interview, that site was doing just under, I think, $20,000 a month when you and I spoke, which just, far exceeded any expectations that I had for that site. It was monetized almost solely with display ads. There are some affiliate links in there, but I'd say 95% of it was display ads. And I had done most of the writing on the site myself. So, I have a 9-to-5 job. I still have that same job. I've had that for, the last 3 years or so. And then every time I get a free moment, was working on that site. So that was sort of the story that you and I talked about then, which was incredible. And then, I got fortunate that the story got a little bit better towards the end. And then excited to talk about that and some of the stuff that's coming up.
Yeah, some of the things I remember from the interview that really stuck out to me were, number one, it's such a good story about how long SEO can take as a tactic, but then when it works, oftentimes it's this exponential growth path. Because I think I remember you saying 1 year in, it was earning hardly anything, and then the pace at which it picked up revenue and page views towards the end, towards the last couple months before the interview, it was just skyrocketing. So that was a really cool thing. You also shared some very interesting tactics you were using to grow it. I won't, we don't need to get into all those details about it, but man, definitely go back and listen. Some of the tactics you shared to grow that site were really fascinating and interesting. So
yeah, I actually want to talk about one of those tactics and some of the changes. We can do that a little bit later, but I did bring up the chart because it's right. The exponential part of it is surprising. And I think once you're aware of it, you might stick with it longer. So
right. And that's a good point. I think that's the inspirational part of it, right? Like you might be at month 9 on your chart and not aware of what's coming, right?
Right. So end of year 1 was 20,000 page views, but the month just before that in November of year 1 was 11,000. So it doubled November to December, and I was making $51. That was year 1. And then end of year 2, so 12 months later, 350,000 page views and $17,000.
And that was in 1 month.
And that was in 1 month. And you and I spoke a couple months later, 2 or 3 months later, and it was making $20,000 a month. And then 4 months later, $46,000 a month. So, and then the trajectory went down from there, which we'll get into sort of what happened to the site and the sales cycles that I went through in selling the site. But yeah, the trajectory of, SEO and the compound nature of it is just, it's hard to grasp until you're in it. And then when you're in it, you think it's just going to keep going forever. You think you really figured things out. And then, as I learned, I hadn't. And so anyways, but it's been a ride, to say the least.
So you shared this story over at Niche Twins, which I was fascinated to learn about the story since the interview, right? And as you alluded, the site has now been sold, but it certainly was not without ups and downs along that last 9 months of the journey. And so you did go into it in an email that you sent out to the people who follow you at Niche Twins. And that's basically what we're going to be talking about today. Is we're going to start where we left off last time in the interview, where the site was earning about $20,000. Now, maybe break the end to us. Tell us what happened, give us the cliff notes, and then we'll just kind of, the way we do on this podcast, we'll start to unwind all the things along the way. And then, all the things you learned throughout that.
Yeah. So the Cliff Notes ending is it sold for high 6 figures, which, ultimately I was very happy with, although I had a 7-figure deal fall through. And so if I hadn't had that 7-figure deal at all, I probably would have just been ecstatic with the high 6-figure deal. But of course you always compare things, but it was a great outcome in the end. But I'll say, to your point, like the first 2 years were kind of like the Goldilocks period for me in SEO. First year, I had nothing to lose, didn't even know it was going to be anything, but was working hard at it. Second year, it was like, wow, this is really working. And then right after you and I finished our episode, the next 4 or 5 months, I feel like was a condensed, just hard lesson in what this business kind of is, right? The real experience of this business, which many people had said to me and shared on Twitter. And some lessons you just have to learn on your own to actually understand and get it. But yeah, it was a lifelong lesson in about 4 or 5 months, I would say.
Yeah, you shared on the last interview, actually. I asked you if you had any intentions of selling it. And at the time, I'm pretty sure you said you didn't. I'm pretty sure you said, you wanted to keep growing it. And you did keep growing it. What were the next couple months like? Were you, what kind of caused the interest in you to stir to sell the site, given that from all intents and purposes, the site was continuing to grow?
Yeah, so there was a handful of reasons, but the biggest ones were, I with this Twitter account and the following that I have and the community of people that, that you're a part of as well, Jared, I had multiple people reach out to me and say, hey, congratulations, based on that income report in August of 46,000 a month. They said, hey, that's a great milestone. Congratulations on that. But hey, have you considered selling? And you want to be selling on the way up. You know what I mean? When things are going well. And at that time, I even responded to them saying, I'm not really that interested in it, but thanks for your, feedback. And we talked back and forth. Long story short, about a couple of weeks later, I decided just to reach out to Quiet Light. So I used Quiet Light ultimately to do the sale. But my thinking was, let me just get everything ready with them. There's a P&L, it's a content site, so it's pretty simple, but it's a P&L. They do, 100 question interview. You can change some, or 100 questions as part of an interview that they give as the package for the sale. But my thinking was, let's get all of that information up to date and ready. And then month to month, I can just send my broker the updated information. He can update it. And I say, list it. And it gets listed in 2 or 3 days versus the lead time that it took, which was 1 or 2 months. So I still wasn't thinking about selling it at that point. It was more being prepared. And then what triggered me wanting to sell it was actually someone on Twitter, again, reaching out to me directly in my DMs. And they had done that 2 or 3 times before, asking me to sell to them. And this third time, they were pretty persistent. And I said, you know what? I actually have a broker now. I don't actually know what this process is like. Here's the broker's contact information at Quiet Light. And you guys connect. And if this is real, let's have further conversations. And so that's how the first sale conversations went, and how that first, even me really considering selling started.
I mean, is it just a number? Like, because since the interview, your site was making $20,000 a month. Fast forward not many months later, 3, 4, 5 months later, the site makes $46,000. What causes you to even take the leap to list it? Was it like, I don't want to put words in your mouth or say the wrong thing, but was it a fear of what you might lose, seeing all the updates that were happening throughout 2022? Was it a number? You're like, well, now based on average multiples, I can get a certain number that I've always been looking for. Was it a change in circumstances that you wanted to have the money for? You had a different use for the money. I'm just trying to kind of walk through some of the things that were going on in your mind.
Yeah, there's so many. For me personally, I think for a lot of people who end up selling, it's not usually one thing. So there's the personal side, and then there's sort of the landscape of niche website side of it. So on the personal side, we have another baby coming in about 27 days. You and I were talking about that just before this, Jared. So, enough said there. That's going to be a big time commitment. Obviously, we have our son who's 20 months old now as well. So 2 kids. That was a compelling enough reason to maybe think about selling this site as I am still working my 9-to-5 job.
Yeah, and a PSA on that note, man, if you don't have kids yet, it's a lot easier to build websites on the side. Not that kids aren't great, but it does make those late nights, early mornings a little harder.
I can contest to that because I started this site without Declan. I continued it with him, but it was definitely more challenging. So that was a big reason. And then, maybe in parallel to that, having a second kid, the house we're in now, we had talked about this during our last interview. We are now pretty close to moving out of this house. And so in order to buy the house that we want to move into, we want to rent the house that we're in now. In order to make that happen, cash on hand became more valuable to me than cash flow. And so this moment in my life, maybe if it was in 2 years or 3 years, I would have valued the cash flow more. But I wanted to put a sizable down payment, especially with where interest rates are now. I think they're above 6% again. Home prices are still really high. I'm in Massachusetts. I think the median home price is over $500,000 here. And so having cash on hand to make that work was important to me. Those are some of the personal sides. I think, you mentioned algorithm updates. I haven't been in this space very long, but the updates the frequency feel like it's been ramped up to 100 as of late, whether it's core updates, spam updates, helpful content updates, link spam updates. Some of them roll out simultaneously back to back, overlapping with each other. In a weird way, I was writing this in the newsletter. I'm going to send this on Friday, but in a weird way, it's like, Google's the dog walker and the search results are the dog, right? Yeah. And Google has the dog on a leash. So in that way, they're in control, but the leash is getting longer and longer, and the play in which the dog can move around, your search results is just getting wider and wider. And that dog is easily excitable. You know what I mean? And so your search results, and that might not matter, right? If we were talking about your dog, but we're talking about your rankings in your business. And so, whether that's a perfect analogy or not is besides the point. But I feel like just in my 3 years of being in this space, the volatility in the results has been pretty wild. And so that's a real risk, I think. It's always been a risk, but I think the risk became bigger over the last couple of months or even year, I would say.
I'm glad to hear you addressed it, only because that's the first thing that tends to go through my mind, right? Like when I think about having a site of that size, the first thing I think of is, oh my goodness, there's so much to lose, right? It like tends to be a plateauing for many businesses, well outside of the online world, just business in general. Certainly, I went through learning about this in the last business I owned, where you think of a business from the outside that it gets easier and easier to grow. But actually, what I learned from working with investors and working with other businesses that had grown and scaled over time is it actually gets harder and harder to grow, because every time you want to grow that next plateau, you have to risk losing more because the business has grown so much. And so I can kind of feel like, man, maybe at $20,000 a month, this is wonderful. At $46,000 a month, all of a sudden I have a lot more to lose potentially. And then you have all these other life things happening and all these events that you could actually use that change of cash flow for. So it's really good, kind of hear you walk through all the different facets.
There's a few others I want to cover. You just hit one of them, which is, you have more to lose. I think when an asset like this becomes a certain percentage of your overall net worth or your overall family's net worth, I think it minimally makes sense to consider de-risking or selling in some way. And so I think this matters less if you have, 10 million in the bank, right? And you have an asset that's worth 5 million. If you lost that asset tomorrow, that's going to be painful, but you still worth $10 million, right? Whereas if you're worth, say, 1 million and you have an asset that's worth 500 or a million and you lose that asset, that could really have improved your quality of life, right? Because now you just have more money to play with, you're more comfort, more financial stability. And so that definitely played a factor in the decision to sell as well. And then the final thing, which I don't talk about much because I'm just kind of a little bit sick of hearing it, I'm very fascinated by it, but is AI. And I think you have to address it. You have to acknowledge that it's real, it's happening. The two things I think about is, as in the traditional niche site model, when you're going after low hanging, long tail keywords, low hanging competition, low hanging fruit, in that traditional model, you're now getting squeezed from both sides with AI. On the one hand, you have Google and Bing with their, chat bots, which are pushing you further down the SERPs, which they're already pushing results further down. So now here's another thing pushing you down, stealing clicks. And then on the other hand, you have ChatGPT and content creators creating their own content, and they're just easily able to spin up content or steal your content for better or worse, reword it, whatever it may be. They're increasing their throughput. So now you're getting squeezed literally from both sides, from the search engines and from creators. And I just think the margin in the traditional niche site model is probably wearing thin. Like those days probably were numbered even when I started to some extent. And who knows, I could be entirely wrong about this. It could last another decade. No one knows. This is all speculation. Mm-hmm. But I think you have to acknowledge that that's a very real, not understood risk at the moment. I think everyone agrees it's going to change search. No one knows exactly how it will. And that risk feels like it's a bit, AI was there, but it wasn't there at the level it has been in the last 3 months or so.
So a lot of factors played into this decision for you. One thing I want to underscore is if you're listening, you might not have a website making $46,000 a month. You might have a website making $4,000 a month or $400 a month. But a lot of the same principles that you just walked through apply no matter what the dollar figure is. It's about evaluating the ROI of having the ongoing cash flow from the asset. It's about evaluating what that would look like in your life to just have that cash up front based on today's multiples. Ongoing risk with the way websites are being created, taking money off the table. Like these are concepts that apply no matter really what the value of the site is, although it probably does peak a bit when your site is growing at the rate that it was growing.
It becomes more prevalent, and also just getting a win, right? Like getting a decent win early on is so important. I've felt it. I'm only a week removed from the sale, and I'm not joking. Emotionally, physically, I have felt better. And I think it's primarily because, well, two things. One is it's validating, which is nice, but it's the financial stability part, like we talked about, is huge. I think, I don't think this is the right way. I'm not a finance person, but I think in terms of like, how many years can I pay my mortgage if I stop working today? If I got hurt, God forbid, or something happened today, how many years of runway do I have of paying my mortgage? Obviously, there's a lot of other bills and stuff that go into that. But that's what personally gives me peace of mind. Everyone has probably a different thing that gives them peace of mind. But this sale allowed me to lock in mentally a couple of years of runway, call it 5, 6, 7 years of like, God forbid something happened, we could pay our mortgage and be completely fine and live our life as is. That's important for me personally, just in terms of mental capacity and creativity and not feeling stress, right? So by selling this, I basically freed up myself to do some other stuff that we'll talk about a little later that I can take my time. There's not this, I don't have pressure for this to work out. I don't need this to work out. I want it to. And I want to do it, which is a big difference between what I did, which was for money. That was my primary driver on the first site. I wanted to make money. It wasn't a passion, it wasn't like some aha moment. And so I think that's important too, is getting a win early on.
So you go through the process of listing the site, and was that fairly easy? A lot of people will talk, especially with their first or second site, about how keeping accounting, keeping numbers, having to backtrack and all that. What sort of things did you learn, or maybe wish you had done a better job of when you listed that site? Maybe a better job so that next time it makes it easier for you to sell a site.
Yeah, fortunately, I had come across, I think his name is Joe Valley, the CEO or founder of Quiet Light. He was actually on, he had an interview with you, I think, Jared,
he did, yeah.
Too long
he's great.
ago, which was a great interview. And he wrote a book, The Exitpreneurs. So I have that book. I read that book, and I'm glad I did. I was already doing some of what was in there, but if I can say one thing, if you have a site or a business, just every month, keep your numbers. It's no one likes doing it. It's not fun. It feels like not productive, but when you come to sell, it just reduces the burden on you greatly. So I would say, actually, I was in a pretty good spot, primarily with a content site. You're dealing with just a P&L. So what were your, earnings, which is just ezoic for me, display ads and Amazon Associates a little bit. And then what are your expenses? And for me, I did all the writing primarily on the site. And so my expenses were hosting with Cloudways and, a $100 keyword research tool, basically. So it was very simple and easy to update that. And so that was easy. The problem with what I did was there was a difference between, which I didn't really think about, cash versus accrual basis. And so depending on, I don't want to even speak on that because I forget what we even decided to do in the end, but I was advised hey, you got to rework some of this because we wanted to do it on, say, a cash basis versus accrual. I forget what we decided. But it was great. It was easy. They're very, the person I worked with, Chris Wozniak at Quiet Light, super experienced. I think he has 15 years in the business, sold a handful of content sites himself. So, this actually sounds like an advertisement for them, but they really were helpful during that process. And so I would say overall, it was not that hard. The hard part is the emotional anguish that you go through when I think it depends on the size of your deal, but because the first offer that I got was in the 7 figures, it made sense to offer the site as SBA qualified, that we would accept offers that needed to get SBA, small business loan approval, in order to acquire the site. And so that could be a combination of cash plus that loan, however they want to structure it. But as soon as you involve the SBA, and some of the SBA people on Twitter will go nuts here when we talk about it because I'm not an expert in SBA. But as soon as you involve them, your timeline lengthens fairly significantly. And so that, for me, this first 7-figure offer that I got at a bad time, which we'll get into in a minute here, of getting hit by a Google update. I got reached out to on Twitter to buy the site. And I think it was 12 or 13 days after that DM and me introducing them to Chris at Quiet Light. I think 12 or 13 days later, I got hit with a Google penalty.
Let's talk about that. Because I don't think many people, and to be clear, there's a distinction here between an algorithm update and losing rankings significantly in an algorithm update. There's a difference between that and a Google penalty. And you received, the timing is crazy. You received a Google penalty, which is an email and a submission through Google Search Console that says, hey, we're Google and we're actually telling you why we're penalizing your site, why the traffic, is going to suffer as a result. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, so I learned a lot. So hopefully someone can take away something from this and avoid some of the stuff I did, although I still don't know exactly what transpired. But the high level is I got a Google manual action, they call it, or a manual penalty, which means an actual human at Google looked at my site And the penalty specifically was for unnatural inbound links to some pages. The some pages is important because there's also another penalty which affects the entire site regarding links. So this was some pages, although Google never told me which pages, so that wasn't very helpful. And so, so that was tough. Yeah, of course, there was no information to help about what it was. But basically, someone at Google looked at my site and said, something's going on here. We can't quite figure it out with the algorithm or with software. I think something's going on here. So you have a penalty until you prove that you try to resolve it, which is, kind of a tough situation to be in. And so a couple things. One is, in terms of link building, we had talked about this quite a bit. I had never done what would be traditionally called link building of any form for over 2.5 years on this site. Mm-hmm. In July of 2022, I was talking with a few people, and it felt like the biggest risk to my site, whatever I convinced myself of this, was that my DR, or my authority of my site, wasn't that high. It was like 25. And I wanted to improve that. And everyone I follow is like, you got to build links. You got to build links. And I was like, no, this is working for me. I don't need it. And so eventually I reached out to a company called, and it is what it is, linkbuilder.io. They were expensive. It was like $3,000 a month. And they assured me that they weren't buying links, but that they would do outreach and try to get sites that made sense to get links. They did an 8-link package for the first month. Long story short, I get that package back, and those websites were horrible. They were really bad sites, and it was noticeable even to me. You go to Ahrefs, plug it in, and you could see those sites' DRs. A normal trajectory of a healthy site, the DR grows over time, naturally getting links or however you're doing it. But it looks like a gradual, and there might be some spikes and some falls, but there's a trend, right? These sites were like way up, way down, so they clearly were playing with manipulating the DR of these sites. And if you went to the websites, they were low quality sites. So I talked with their team. They removed all of those links within 20 days of them being on my site. So they put them on. I asked them to remove it. They gave me a full refund. That was in July. And then 3 months later, I get this penalty. And so I had reached out to a couple people in the community, and I got very different opinions, which was interesting, from people that really do this for a living, like look at link audits. And the one I found most compelling was that it may have been that these links were toxic to begin with, which is red flag number 1. And then having them removed so quickly was like another red flag number 2. So you're almost giving 2 quick signals to Google of like, hey, and this is all speculation, nobody knows. But that's sort of a long explanation of the in-depth that we went into. And I ended up hiring this guy, Chris, at Penalty Hammer. He's great. I recommend him to anybody if they have an issue, penaltyhammer.com. And he went in, did a link audit, and did a disavow file of all the links that he thought were spammy. As your site grows, you naturally get spammy links. That's just part of any website. He went in and took all of the websites he saw that looked spammy, disavowed them, and it got 4 months of waiting to hear back from Google. And luckily, we got it removed. We can talk about the second sale, but like 2 days after we officially listed it publicly, the penalty got removed. So there was a bad thing getting the penalty. It was great timing to get it removed because it really sparked more interest, and the people that were already interested became more interested, right? Because the penalty was gone.
Before we jump into the podcast, I wanted to let you know that today's episode is sponsored by Search Intelligence. Here's a short clip of Ferry from Search Intelligence showing you how their agency built digital PR links to a client's website.
High-tier backlinks in publications such as Daily Post, MSN, Birmingham Mail, and many more. Let me show you how we've done it. The campaign was pretty simple. We looked at the number of Instagram followers for each contestant in the Dancing on Ice show that aired in January. We sorted the contestants by the most popular ones. Now we've had the most influential Dancing on Ice contestant. Then we've also used an Instagram earnings calculator to calculate how much every contestant could make from one post on Instagram based on the number of their followers and engagement rate. Then we put these findings in a nice press release and an email, and we found the relevant journalists with a tool called Roxhill, where we looked at journalists who covered the show in the past 30 days and sent the findings and the press release to these journalists. And then the links started landing like this and this and this and many more. I hope this inspires and shows you that you can build links with simple and basic campaigns.
If you want similar link building PR campaigns for your website, head to search-intelligence.co.uk and get in touch with them now. So a couple things there. I just want to highlight it. We haven't talked penalties much on the podcast, at least not recently. If you want to go all the way back in the archives, because this podcast has been around for a very long time, I know Spencer has had some conversations about it in past episodes many years ago. So they don't tell you they don't tell you which pages are affected. They don't give you much information. You elected to really deep dive and evaluate what maybe could have caused the unnatural links. You haven't done any link building, but you're willing to admit that, hey, these links that you had acquired were not what you would consider to be good links. Had them removed, and then the penalty kind of hit a little bit later after that. What are the things? I mean, disavowing. So that's a bit of a dicey topic. You talk to 10 SEOs and 5 will say that, well, Google says that they ignore spammy links now, that that's just not a factor. They just don't give you any credit for them. And then 5 others will say, you've got to really manage your link profile and actively use the disavow file. Talk a bit more about how you decided to arrive there and how you isolated which links to go after, given that across the board, it was only some of your pages that were affected.
Yeah, those are all, I'm certainly not an authority on this topic, which is why I paid, Penalty Hammer to handle it. So I didn't actually do the link audit. The person I paid did do that. I think the hard part with SEO in general, and that's why there's this old, adage of it depends, right? That's the most annoying thing about SEO is like, in large part, it depends is actually the correct answer. I would love to know, there's got to be a bazillion sites out there who are doing truly sketchy, spammy link building tactics or just violating Google's guidelines beyond 8 measly links in 3 years that they got removed in 20 days, right? Like, boo-hoo me, but it just felt like the wrong site to go after in my opinion. But no, so I was willing to pay for it because I don't have expertise in that area. They did a link audit and it was a big file. I had a lot of links that he said were low quality that were pointing to certain pages and the website in general. Then you disavow them. Google also wants to see you make an effort to reach out to webmasters. So they want to see some communication, like you actually go to the email on their about and you say, hey, can you take this link down off your site? They want that effort. And so he did that for me as well. And then he puts together a little bit of a package of all those things, submits it to Google. The problem with a penalty is it's a black box. There's no one, you can't call some assistant at Google and say, hey, how's the status of my request? You're just waiting. And I've heard, stories of they hear back in a month. I've heard a couple of weeks. I've heard 6 months in some cases before you ever even hear back from Google. And so that was the hard part, was just wondering, is this going to get lifted? A lot of times it takes 2 or 3 tries to get it lifted. So to get it lifted in the first try was huge. And the timing of it worked out in the end.
Yeah, it's I mean, at my agency that I run for my day job, we've worked with several companies post penalty, and in one case it took 13 months with the back and forth to have a penalty removed.
So you know what, I was feeling sorry for myself. 4 months is pretty good.
So just so you know, I wasn't a part of the penalty recovery process, but we started doing work on the site after that, and it was a 13-month process. I feel
bad for that webmaster. That's painful.
Yeah. So what effects did this have on traffic and earnings? And are you able to determine the effects this specifically had versus maybe all the other things that just happen to a site on a monthly basis? Yeah,
it's really difficult to determine, but I think it's a combination. I don't think this was the one factor. So just to give some context, the site really peaked. I'm looking at the chart of traffic in front of me here. So the site peaked at 780,000 page views in August. And then the next month it did 761. So it didn't, just kind of leveled out at that point. And then October, when the penalty came, it still did 709,000, but the penalty came at the very end of October. So before the penalty hit, the site was already plateauing in the 700,000 range for 3 months.
Yep.
End of October, then traffic started to grind each month down. So October, November, December, January, the site dropped 50% between those 4 months. There wasn't a single day. Sometimes if you look at, I look at competitors in my space all the time when I own the site, and some of my competitors, you could see their traffic in a 2-day span drop 50%. And that was to me, that's a clear indication, an algorithm update, right? Like clearly Google has changed the way they favor your website. My site, if you look at the decline that happened over the course of 4 months, there's no 1 or 2 day period where the site clearly got hit. It just grinds. And of course, if you look, depending on what scale you look at, it looks like a free fall. But if you look at it on a year period, it clearly is grinding lower over 4 months from August all the way actually to February. And then when the penalty got lifted in early February, immediately following the first week, it was up 15%. And I had been doing a little bit of refreshing content on 4 or 5 pages, but I doubt that contributed to the 15% rebound. But this is where it's hard to parse truly what it is. But so I think the action certainly had an impact, but there's also so many updates going on around link spam, right? So if I had unnatural inbound links, would it be crazy if the Google algorithm picked up on something and I got hit a little bit there? Could it be helpful content? Could it be certainly content that was very outdated? I hadn't updated any of the content in large part on my site for 3 years, which I had tweeted that out, and people in the industry are like, how do people miss this? You have to refresh content. And I was getting great results doing that. I had articles that fell to 8 and then update them and they'd bounce back to position 2 within 24 hours. And so that was definitely a contributing factor. But I think, to answer your question, I think it's multiple things that happen to the site. And so, I don't think you can pinpoint and just blame it on, a penalty from Google. I think it was probably a combination of those things.
Interesting. Wow. Yeah, it's so interesting. I think the one piece of data that really cements that opinion, right, is that the week after the penalty was removed, your site traffic did bounce back, but not the full, say, 50%, right? So there's a lot of components having to play there.
Yeah, for sure. And I've heard, who knows, but I've heard people that have penalties in the past, traffic does not return immediately, regardless. If that was the determining factor of why traffic fell, you would expect it to grind higher over a period of months, is what I've heard. Not that it's like some elastic rebound effect of like you're being suppressed and then the next day the suppression is released. Who knows? I don't know a lot more than that, but so we'll see. We'll see what happens. I'm excited. The new person who bought the site, I'm really excited to see what they end up doing with it. We ended up repricing it to reflect the reality of both the penalty and the current traffic situation. Site was still doing in January, the last month that I officially owned the site, it was doing a little over 355,000 page views still, and was still earning 5 figures. I think it did around $13,000 in January, which in January, ad rates are already suppressed greatly. It's one of the worst months of the year for ad rates for revenue. And so for it to still be doing 5 figures with traffic down significantly, there was still a valuable asset, just not at the original 7-figure valuation that I had.
So let's reset a bit here, because we've kind of navigated down a bunch of different topics, which is great. That's what we're here to do. But to give ourselves a reset on the timeline, the site peaked in traffic in August of 2022. We were looking at over 700,000 page views, $46,000 a month. And then in the fall, you listed it for sale, and basically simultaneously, the site traffic started to drop, probably partly as a result of a penalty and partly a result of aging content and maybe even some algorithm updates that you alluded to. Now, you had an accepted offer, and that accepted offer came in right before the penalty hit. What ended up happening with the offer? Obviously, at this point, we know it fell through. But how did that offer progress as these other factors we just went through were playing themselves out?
Yeah, so that was hard. So to be clear, the site was not publicly listed. Although it wasn't on Quiet Light's website. It was someone reached out to me on Twitter. I had already reached out to Chris, and they were kind of back channeling because we're like, we have a bird in the hand, right? They want to buy the site. It was a good valuation, and so that took place. I said 12 or 13 days later, I get hit with the penalty, manual action rather, from Google. I reached out to the potential buyers immediately and let them know. They were still interested. Again, the site was still doing fairly well and earning, between $30,000 and $40,000 a month. So they were still very much interested, although concerned, which naturally, they would be. They pursued an SBA loan, as I mentioned, for funding. And that process is it's difficult because, you're getting very good terms typically with an SBA loan. But in order to get those terms, you have to really prove that one, the business is worth it. and two, that you can back up. Actually, one of the benefits of an SBA loan is that you typically don't have to personally guarantee it, which is a huge differentiator with typical loans, as I understand it. What happened was the first SBA loan that they got, the terms actually did require them to personally guarantee it, which they were not expecting and they were not comfortable with. And so they went to another SBA loan bank, basically, and that bank took up their application. So they didn't have to start over, but it was definitely not ideal, considering at that point we were like 3 months or 2 months into the process about. So they get the other SBA loan going. Those terms were actually fine. They weren't needing to personally guarantee the loan, and they got approved for the original 7-figure amount to buy the site. Flash forward a little bit, it did feel like they understandably were dragging their feet because they wanted to see, as traffic was grinding lower and lower, they wanted to buy time to see what was happening. And I completely understand that. I actually took the initiative because they shared, I had asked a couple of questions like, hey, what's taking so long? I feel like we're approved. Let's move it along. You signed the letter of intent. They got the loan approved. We're moving on to the asset purchase agreement to actually, bindingly say they're going to buy the site for this amount, and then you go to escrow and close. So we're at the asset purchase agreement part. We're sharing. I have my attorney involved. They have theirs. So we're invested at this point, but they felt like they were taking a little while. They had shared their lender's contact information and said, if you have any questions, reach out to them. So I had called them in the morning and just said, hey, my name is Michael Donovan. They're buying such and such site from me. You're representing them. Can you just give me an update on the loan, how it's going? And they were like, it's great. We're approved. They're good to go. And they wanted to wait another 30 days. So at that point, I kind of put a little pressure on them to say, hey, guys, either you want it or you don't. I understand if you don't. At that point, that forced their hand of like, hey, I'm so sorry to do this. They were invested too, right? I mean, they had attorney fees. They had SBA loan fees that they can't get back as part of the process as well. And so it wasn't a good situation for anybody. So I'm not faulting, it was just a tough situation in general. And so that was the story of the first one, but I said that in about 3 minutes. That was 3+ months of just like seeing my traffic decline and knowing that there's this 7-figure offer that's there, but every day traffic is going further and further down. Earnings are going further and further down. And, 7 figures is a big deal, to me, to my family, that's significant. And so it just emotionally, it took the life out of me for that, 3-month period, basically.
Well, I'm sorry it fell through. That is a double effect, right? You're like already having to deal with the challenges and emotional frustrations of having a site that's going down. You got the penalty on top of it, which is weighing on you. And then you've got a deal that's elongating and taking forever. Deal falls through and it collapses. You still have a penalty in place. You've got a site that's declined in traffic by some 50%. We have a happy ending here. Why don't we start making our way towards the happy ending?
Yeah. So in the end, this is all a fantastic outcome. We can summarize, at the end what this little site did in 3 years, a little over 3 years. But, so in the end, I was done with this website. There was just zero chance that I was
Can't imagine why at this point.
Yeah, where I mentioned the baby's coming, the house, but then this experience was just pretty painful. But I still had a valuable asset. I mean, 5 figures a month, it's still a great asset in that way. But it's got a penalty. There's uncertainty and there's risk involved. And so I talked with Chris at Quiet Light. We reevaluated the sale. He, I was actually against his advice. He thought we could get a bit of a higher price. I wanted to be done with it. And I also importantly, I wanted all cash buyers. I did not want an SBA loan to be an option or loans in general. And so we landed on actually a high 6-figure amount as the sale price. That ended up getting, even with the penalty, we got a ton of interest in the site. And then 2 or 3 days later, the penalty got lifted. And so that, I think for me, that's what helped me close so quickly. I think we closed in 2.5 weeks from the day that it was publicly listed to me selling. So that was huge to have the penalty listed because the people that were interested were now very interested because the penalty's gone. We had obviously disclosed all that in the public listing. So that was a big deal. And then what ended up happening, we got multiple offers above asking, which was fantastic. And the ending offer was 15% above asking. So it was high 6 figures, which again, if you had told me that when I started this thing, just that alone would have been just a crazy success. And so I have to keep like putting that in perspective, having, had the 7-figure deal fall through. Between the sale and the earnings while I earned the site, it was over 7 figures in profit. And when mostly because, if you value my time, which I do, that's probably not the true number, right? Because I did a lot of work on the site, and I wrote a lot on it. But the outcome, for a site like that with 300, and I think when I officially sold, I'd written 350. We deleted some posts. I think it was around 320 posts or so total on the site. Just a great first experience. That's the other thing is most times when you're learning something, at least in my experience, there's a cost, right? Maybe you make a dumb mistake and that costs you up front, but then in the long term, it pays off because you learned that thing, or it's just time you're learning and then you get to use that learning later. In this case, I got to learn SEO and content sites for 3 years and it was super profitable. It was painful at certain points. But I've got the history of a site going up, a site going down, getting hit by a penalty, having a 7-figure deal fall through, but experiencing the SBA loan and buying process from end to end, and then having a cash deal go through. And so great experience overall. And in the end was, a great outcome. I would have imagined it was that kind of outcome 3 years ago.
I'm hearing so many threads from all the different financial investment books and financial literacy books I've read over the years, and your perspective on it, I think, is really valuable, especially as you alluded to in today's ever-changing and pretty volatile online world that we live in. Like, to expect a website to continuously climb over the course of 3 years and not have ups and downs seems to be far-fetched. It could happen. It probably does happen, but you probably went on the roller coaster that a lot of people echo with, right? Like that they kind of synonymize with that. And there's an element that we don't talk about much, which is balancing your emotions as you go along the roller coaster, and during the hard times, continuing to stay focused on, ultimately what is best, right? And we see this with people, talking about taking time away from a site for a while because it gets hit. Just, the emotional effects of it. It sounds like you really were able to maintain your perspective on it throughout. Is that, I mean, any tips on that? Because I'm not just thinking about the person trying to sell their site and they have the myriad of things that happen to you, but just the person who also emotionally gets super deflated from a big algorithm hit, kind of like you addressed earlier.
Yeah, I'm glad somehow it comes across that I was like completely stable during this whole time and confident. But no, I think, it was hard. I thought things that I'm going to start doing now, like I wasn't eating great. I wasn't working out like I typically do. I don't think I did handle it all that well while it was happening. What I did do is stick with it, though. I did not get deterred from seeing this thing through and making sure that there was an outcome. And I also knew that I was done working on the site. The worst thing you could do is be done and just let that drag on and kind of half commit to doing it, because it's just going to die, right? Like it'll die over time. And so I knew that I was done, which is important. Some people, they kind of know, or they can't admit it to themselves. Maybe they're really invested in the project. Luckily for me, again, this wasn't a passion project for me. So it was easier, I think, on that end. But yeah, I don't think I handled it particularly well emotionally. But, in the end, the outcome was great. And, now, again, like I have this win under my belt and some time that it bought me, which is huge. And so now I can kind of reset. But while it was happening, I think my wife will certainly contest that I was not the best person to be around, just in general.
Fair enough. I was trying to give you a free softball there. But
I appreciate that.
I'm glad you told us the truth, because that's the reality for all of us at some point. This is a tough game, and but it's great to see a happy ending like you have. So, let's talk a bit about what's next for you and Website Blend. I think that I don't know if you had ever started a second site or anything like that. I don't think you had. Like where are you at now? What are we doing going forward?
Yeah, so I actually did start a second site a while back. And I'm glad you brought this up, because it was built foundationally on this concept of brand swapping that you and I had talked about back then. And to be clear, I'm not a guru. I've never put myself out there as a guru, just sharing what I was doing that was working as I went. Not that anyone knows exactly what works, what doesn't. That was working, and so I shared it. I believe now, it's very hard to tell with all these updates, but I'm of the opinion now that it's worth the effort to not use word for word. And I need to update a couple things on our site and to share this more publicly, but this is a great opportunity to get in front of a lot of people that heard me say that then. I just think, one, it's not a sure thing that duplicate content is necessarily an issue, but if you can take the effort to reword it so that it's unique, it's definitely not an issue. And so just that alone, I think it's worth rewriting it for the peace of mind of, having my site traffic decline the way it did. You could point to 10 million different reasons why that might have been. But in the back of my head, I was always thinking a certain percentage of my articles were brand swap articles, which were basically the high level for people that didn't see it was you take a brand, you basically take another brand for the same topic and you use 60 or 70% of that content because that content works for both those keywords. And so you just reuse it. It's still super helpful. It answers the question, but I'm of the mindset now that you should take the effort to reword it, even if it is the same exact answer, reword it from a unique standpoint. So long way of saying, I'm not going to work on that site. I only put 30 articles on that site, but also that site, which leads to what I'm doing next, and I'm excited about, that site was going after long tail keywords that were low competition, medium volume. Like we talked about, I think you're getting squeezed if you follow that model, and that's going to be difficult going forward. People are probably eye rolling that have been saying this forever, but you need more than one platform. If you just rely on, and again, like I've heard this a million times, you have to learn lessons yourself sometimes, go through it. But if you just rely on SEO, I mean, man, that is a tough way to exist because you're basically on a one-legged stool. And for a period of time there, I was like juggling on that one-legged stool. I was comfortable. Everything was great. And then someone comes along and bumps you a little bit and you realize all at once you're on a one-legged stool, right? You're just getting organic SEO traffic. And so for me, you got it, newsletters, social, whether it's YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, whatever it may be. Organic, obviously, that's another leg. Physical, digital products. You need this ability to have more than one income stream and more than one way to be seen online. And again, this is old news. People told it to me a million times, but I believe that strongly. And so Niche Twins is a good example of what we're trying to do. That was just almost easy because you and I had that interview. The Twitter account got a following. So right off the bat, social presence, I'm the person behind that. We start Niche Twins, the website. We started getting, doing income reports. So getting social traffic over to the site in that way. I just spun up a newsletter that I sent the first one last week. I'm going to do it every Friday in the morning, weekly going forward. So that's another way that we're trying to get, build a list. Keith is working hard on the SEO side of that site. So he's going after keywords, but creating great content and adding YouTube videos to all those things. So you can see right off the bat, it's already way more involved than anything I talked about on my first site. And I think foundationally, we started right off the gate with an interview with you and links from very reputable sources to Niche Twins, like day one. And I'm not saying everyone can start a site that way, but that's a good example of like building that swell of you're a real person. It's a little bit slower, I think, but you're a real person and you're backing that site and you become an authority in that space. And then you can start to branch out in different ways like I just discussed. I think it's more durable in every sense of the word than just a niche site in the traditional sense.
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth because my next question was going to be, hey, looking back on 3 years and one site and 7 figures of profit, what would you do differently? But it sounds like you know exactly what you would do differently and you're already doing it on your next site.
So that's Niche Twins. And then that's right. That's Niche Twins. We're doing that. And then my wife actually started a travel site and she wrote 4 total articles. This was 7 or 8 months ago. She does a great job. It took her a while. Content takes a long time. All unique photos, all unique perspective. And those 4 articles are getting 1,000 page views a month. We haven't touched it since. It's a great domain. It's a great site in general. And so I'm also going to be working on that and really making that, brand, whatever you want to call it. If your site isn't a site that someone would genuinely share with someone else for any reason other than just finding you in Google, then you're not, I just don't think you'll exist in the next 10 years. And that's a hard thing that if I just took a step back and said the site that I had, would anyone ever genuinely share? Maybe they'd share my content for sure, but would they share the website overall? And I think the hard answer was no. Now, there's ways to make it so that that's the case. You might say like, well, do you feel bad about selling that? Well, it's kind of like a stock, right? Like I sell because I think it's going down. Someone buys, they see a massive opportunity. So there's always two sides, and who knows, I could be wrong. But there's always opportunities to start with SEO and then build in these other facets. But we're going to do that with that travel site as well. And so I think the long summary here is, or the short summary of the long explanation there is, the goal now, I think, is slower and better for longer. My goal early on was just make money quickly, go after it. And I think people will still do that and kill it. There's opportunities there. But for me, I'd rather put out a great piece of content that's really, really great, has a lot of, has a YouTube video, has a newsletter aspect, whatever it may be, and you really build something that's great. That will last, and that's unique as well. That's going to last long term. With all the chaos, I still think you'll have a business. If you do what I did to start, I don't know that will get you what it did for me. I think there's still time. But again, we're all speculating. I'm just talking about what I think, right?
That's great.
Yeah.
It's great. Yeah. I mean, the concept of brand is something that is being talked about probably more so now than ever before in this space. And, obviously a brand is something really big, but I know you were referenced a couple of weeks ago or a couple months ago now when Kevin Espiritu came on, the king of brand building himself, frankly. I mean, the brand
Incredible.
He's built over at Epic Gardening is fantastic. And he's talked about this approach. And, you had a great 7-figure, not exit, but 7 figures of profit over the course of this asset you built. But Kevin's earning, I don't remember, on a monthly basis, right? He's built a brand that does all those things. So I think it's interesting to hear you talk about it almost in reverse, because you get to a level that is very difficult and most people will never see. And then we talk about the effects of a brand and where it can take you well beyond that level you even got with this website you currently just sold.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, I'm glad you brought up Kevin. Kevin's great, by the way. What he's built with Epic Gardening is, I think most people in our space look up to him. If you're not, you should be. And just a quick story. So we just crossed on Twitter, started DMing each other. And at the end of this long conversation, I've never met him before, never talked to him. He just sends me his cell phone number and says, if you need anything, let me know. So he's just I think he's a genuine nice guy. So he made a comment on his interview with you talking about my site, which I agreed. So I want to just comment on that. We can probably end there. But so he made a couple comments. One, which was I completely agree with, is if you shine a light on a business and that poses a risk to the business, what do you really have? Like, is that a business? And when I hear that, I instantly think, yes, of course, I agree with that sentiment completely. But I would argue that for him, he built Epic Gardening early on, right? And it was going after, for his words, SEO traffic, like keywords. He was built a blog. That blog made $100 a month, then 1,000, then a couple thousand. If he had the audience that he has now, I wonder if he would feel comfortable sharing what he was doing then at that stage, at that phase in his growth. I think that's the distinguishing part. I agree. Your goal should always be to get to a point where you are comfortable saying, here's my website, here's my business, right? But I do still believe that there's a period of time where you're incredibly vulnerable, especially with the ability, and I've experienced it firsthand. So I know for a fact, people can steal your content, spin it slightly, and outrank you. That happens all the time. And so I just don't know that there's too much of a benefit at the early phase to outing yourself or outing your site. At some point, it becomes very beneficial, in my opinion. Now, Kevin has his physical products make up the majority of his business. He's buying businesses now. So he's at a stage in his career, his business, where giving his name is only a benefit to his brand. But I think early on, I'm sure I'd be interested to hear people's opinion on that. But when you're just trying to start with just SEO and then you want to evolve it into a newsletter and then something else, I think you hit a point where you become comfortable sharing it. But until then, it's hard enough in this game on the internet to get traction. Why would you invite competition if you have an audience? I'm not talking about telling your 2 friends about your website. I'm talking about a targeted audience that are interested in what you're doing. Maybe they'll come after that opportunity that you just showed them. It's a little bit like saying, I found gold over here. It's working. The ad rates are great. You stay over there, anonymous person, and I'll just continue collecting this. That's how I think about it. I'd be interested what other people think, but anyways, what he's built is incredible. And I agree. Your goal should be, here's my business, and say it publicly.
truly the benefits of building a brand. I mean, when you get to a point where almost flipping on its head, you get to a point where you really don't care either way because your brand is, I don't want to use the word bulletproof, but certainly can handle quite a bit, whatever the case may be.
Good luck going after epic gardening. I would just say that.
I'm not starting a gardening website anytime soon. I'll tell you that much. Well, hey, Mike, this is, I can't believe an hour flew by so fast. I mean, what a crazy story, but what a successful story in the end. And I think that's the perspective I would have as well is, if you only, choose to focus on, really a seemingly short downward period in an otherwise very successful 3-year trajectory you created with this website. If you only chose to focus on that, sure you could, but really the step back approach that you're taking is that this is such a big win for you. And I think, again, just continuing the inspiration that your first podcast episode carried. I said at the beginning, but if you didn't listen to Mike's first interview, it's a great deep dive into the first couple of years of growing a website, not only the tactics of how you did it, but also a lot of the inspiration behind sticking through it. And then now we get to cap it with this interview here and the culmination of it. So congratulations, man. What a big success, and so excited to see what you have coming over the next phase of your online business here.
Yeah, thanks, Jared. And thanks. That interview is really, if I hadn't started, I started the Twitter account because I knew I was getting an interview with you. And that's what started this whole niche twin thing in the first place. So thanks to you, thanks to Spencer, has been great. And again, even a week removed, I don't know that I would, I'd take the money, the delta of the 7-figure sale and what I sold it for. But genuinely, I don't think I would change much. I mean, I've experienced a lot, and that experience is worth something. And so, great outcome. I'm happy about it. If people want to learn or just hear more about that process, I'm going to be writing about that sale process in more depth. Because I have a lot of emails that went into that sale process. So I want to kind of break it down into phases of the sale process. So when you sell a content site with an SBA loan with cash only, what that looks like. That's one example, but Niche Twins newsletter is something I'm going to focus on weekly on Friday mornings is the goal.
That's where I first kind of got introduced to the whole process that you've gone through this last couple of months. I know on Twitter you're at Niche Twins. What's the website people can get signed up if they want to get your email newsletter?
Yeah, the website is nichetwins.com, and then my Twitter account is Niche Down, and Keith's is Patient Publish.
Ah, good. I'm glad you corrected me.
No worries.
It's been a while since I blew a Twitter handle, but I do it every now and then again. So yeah. It's at
play.
Niche Down, and obviously we've got your Niche Twins, however you want to say it, .com.
You just angered everybody by saying it both ways.
I tried to, hey, I got to play Switzerland here. I'm the host, all right? It's up to you to have strong opinions. I'm just the host. I got to play both sides.
Yeah. Fair enough.
Hey, Mike, thanks so much. Until we talk again, really appreciate you coming on and sharing your story. What a wonderful one, and congratulations again.
Thank you so much, Jared. I appreciate it.
Introducing nichesites.com. Are you looking to scale your niche site portfolio or build your first website? Look no further than nichesites.com. With a portfolio of successful websites and over 700 plus satisfied clients, the folks at nichesites.com have the skills and experience to help you succeed. From keyword research to link building, content writing to done-for-you websites, nichesites.com offers a full range of services to help your content site grow. As the saying goes, a trial is worth more than 1,000 words, and they're offering a special trial just for new customers. You get 5,000 words of content completely free with your order of 10,000 plus traffic backlinks. Don't miss this opportunity. Head on over to nichesites.com/trial and take advantage of this amazing trial offer. Again, it's niche sites, plural, nichesites.com/trial. Go claim your free content today. Today's episode is sponsored by Search Intelligence. Here's a short clip of Ferry from Search Intelligence showing you how their agency built digital PR links to a client's website.
High-tier backlinks in publications such as Daily Post, MSN, Birmingham Mail, and many more. Let me show you how we've done it. The campaign was pretty simple. We looked at the number of Instagram followers for each contestant in the Dancing on Ice show that aired in January. We sorted the contestants by the most popular ones. Now we've had the most influential Dancing on Ice contestant. Then we've also used an Instagram earnings calculator to calculate how much every contestant could make from one post on Instagram based on the number of their followers and engagement rate. Then we put these findings in a nice press release and an email, and we found the relevant journalists with a tool called Roxhill, where we looked at journalists who covered the show in the past 30 days and sent the findings and the press release to these journalists. And then the links started landing like this and this and this and many more. I hope this inspires and shows you that you can build links with simple and basic campaigns.
If you want similar link building PR campaigns for your website, head to search-intelligence.co.uk and get in touch with them now.